girl possessed. This incident happened when I was 19 and attending a local Catholic college. The nuns who ran the college would conduct a yearly retreat, which all the Catholic students had to attend. Being a devout Catholic, I went along and looked forward to spending a fun-filled time with my friends. The retreat was for 3 days, wherein about 150 girls resided on the college premises. For the entire day, we would pray, sing hymns, and attend masses. A priest named Father Joe was flown in to conduct the services for us. During that time, there was a girl named Beverly who was part of a popular group of girls. She was dark with long black hair, and her striking feature was her long painted nails. On day 2 of the retreat, it was about 9 p.m. at night that Father Joe was praying over the gathering. He was invoking the names of many saints and asking for their intercession. The atmosphere was very intense and devotional, and many of us were overcome with emotion and sobbing. Suddenly, we noticed Beverly behaving very strangely. Her face was contorted. Her hair streamed out from around her face. Her eyeballs looked huge and very white. She could not be restrained in her seat and was making an attempt to go up to and attack the priest. The scariest part was the sight of her nails. They looked like talons, and she used them to scrape on the wooden windows. She was in a rage. Her voice altered between that of a man's and a woman's and was very guttural. She kept screaming, "I'm going to kill you," to the priest. She said her name was Margaret, and that before she died, she used to work as a maidservant in Beverly's house. The nuns and some of the older girls had a hard time controlling her and pinning her down. Father Joe asked for a whip to be brought. Needless to say, we were petrified and fled to our rooms. We spent the entire night discussing the incident and only slept at daybreak. The next day, Beverly was her normal self and had no recollection of what happened. This incident I can never forget, and it still haunts me to this very day. The devil responds. I used to not believe in this sort of thing at all, but then it actually happened to me. This was quite a few years ago, but it has stuck with me to this very day. When I was around 16 to 17 years of age, I was listening to a heavy metal tape, Iron Maiden to be exact, that my brother didn't approve of. It actually used to be his tape, but he didn't want me being exposed to some of the satanic references on the tape. I don't remember the exact conversation, but when he said he didn't want me listening to it, I shot back with several stupid statements about liking the devil or something idiotic like that. He promptly pulled the tape out of the player in his car and threw it out the window. I was pretty angry with him for a long time, as it was a really good tape, and I was very much into it at that time. When we got home that night, I was regretful about the things I had said. I didn't really mean them, but was just saying them to make him angry and get back at him. I was actually a little spooked by what I had said. Now, a little background about my house at the time. My parents were very heavily into antiques, and this house itself was created to look like a very old house, even though it was only maybe 20 years old. It had all this old woodwork and old-looking paints. The windows were all hand-blown glass, etc. It was actually put together from parts of actual old houses that had been shipped in. My real room at the time was under construction, and in the meantime, I just had a mattress on the floor of a tiny room. There were 2 doors in this room, but only about a foot of walking space beside my mattress. Once bedtime arrived, I was still kind of shaken, so I turned on the lights in the room adjoining the one I was sleeping in and left that door open so I could see everything just fine. I said goodnight to my mom and laid down. I had been there maybe 30 seconds when I heard what sounded like some sort of tiny footsteps coming across the wooden floor in the adjoining room. Now in this house, you can hear everyone coming in and going. All the floors creaked. Furthermore, you could pretty typically tell who it was that was coming. But in this case, I didn't recognize the footsteps. But they were so light, I figured it must have been my mother. So I called out, "Mom?" Not 2 to 3 seconds after this, the door to that room slammed shut, plunging me into complete darkness. And right around the same time, I heard what sounded like these little feet run across this room and right up the little bit of floor space right next to where my head was. There was no way this could have been a person. I was scared out of my mind. I quickly yanked the covers over my head and for the only time in my life, broke out in a cold sweat. I sat there with my mind going absolutely nuts about what to do, realizing that whatever ran in my room was still there, right beside me. I'm actually not sure if only a few seconds passed or a few minutes. I was so terrified. Finally, I made up my mind to run out of the room. I threw back my covers and ran for the other door out of my room. I made it with no problems and ran to tell my brothers, who were out in the garage working out. I had them come back up to the room to see if anything was there. Nothing was out of place, but I noticed when we went in there, the door that had slammed shut was now wide open again. My brothers have sworn over and over again that they had nothing to do with what I experienced, and there is no doubt in my mind that they didn't. It couldn't have been a person navigating in that dark room like what I heard. I've never imagined weird things like that, and I'm 100% positive I didn't fall asleep either. It happened, and I can't explain it. I'll tell you one thing though. I never had said something stupid like I did that day, ever again. Chomedy Devil. There's something up here in Quebec, Canada, specifically the city of Laval, in the district of Chomedy, not far from Montreal. Too many strange occurrences in the last few decades have happened here. I will tell you about the most famous one, of which I am one of the witnesses. Tracks on the asphalt ground, burned into the ground, were found in June of 1976 in my neighborhood, just a street corner away, in fact. To this day, no method of reproducing those tracks was successful. It wasn't chalk, paint, or any other known substance. And what did those tracks look like? A goat's hooves, hundreds of them across the tiny street. The tracks started at one point in the middle of the street and ended inexplicably a few feet further away. No clue where it had come from and where it had headed to when it departed. It was as if the devil had briefly entered our realm, walked around a bit, and vaporized just as he came. All the tracks were different, which an expert's opinion proved it was no hoax. All the area heard about the tracks. Famous local paranormal expert Christian Robert Page investigated them too. On my end of this, when I saw the tracks myself, I wasn't very much impressed. I was very young at the time, only about 10. Only now have I put 2 and 2 together. There are rumblings in the area of a lot of Satanism going on around here. And if any of it is true, those tracks might well have been the devil paying a visit to its fan club. The coven apparently gave their idol the wrong address. Battle with a demon. From little on up, as my mother likes to say, I have seen and felt things that no one else could. When I was young, I would point to a figure or person who should not have been in my home, or anywhere else I was for that matter, and ask, "Who's that?" Normal reply to this was, "No one, be quiet," as my grandparents are deeply religious and felt anything abnormal was the work of the devil. As for my mother, she just gets freaked out very easily. Having spent 18 and now very close to 19 years of being my friend's own personal Miss Cleo, as they love to tease me with that little bundle of joy title, friends and family have come to recognize and accept the fact I have something of a gift, even if I don't see it as being anything special. However, one of the most startling experiences happened this year. At one point during the year, I was on a 4-month internship at my mother's workplace. I adored not only my job, but my mother and my boss, who I'll simply call D. I don't think there's any real way to describe the incredible person that D is, so I'll just say that she believes in exactly what I do. So one morning, she was working from her home office and called in to check on my mother and I to see how our work was going. She told my mother that she felt the energy in the office needed to be cleaned, as we had been working for a month on a very intense grant report to keep our funding. Needless to say, stress levels at that time were through the roof, and she wanted all the negativity in the office out. So she told my mom to ask me to do a cleansing and a blessing, and then tell her how it went. After Mom told me this, I trotted my happy self into the kitchen of the office, pulled out the salt, and dumped some in a bowl, said a little blessing over it, and went into the front office, which is my mother's, to start the cleansing. Now, what you need to know about this office is that it is not only haunted, it had once been a seminary, and then our town's very first, house of ill repute, to put it in a gentle way. So I knew we had ghosts, one of which is named Bradley, and still teases and talks with me whenever I'm there. Also, a month before this, my mother had a terrifying nightmare that a demon was in her ear, trying to make her do bad things, which relates very highly to the story I'm sharing now. I had started the cleansing and blessing, and had pinched some salt between my fingers, dusting it around the edges of the room. Before this, Mom had been listening to the radio and the internet, and I had told her to shut it off. As I was saying, "Goddess, cleanse this place and give it your blessing," and all the other good stuff I say, I heard this. I don't even know how to rightly describe it. It was a deep voice, and it came to me like it was coming from down a long, very deep tunnel, almost like I shouldn't be hearing it. First I thought it was something outside because we had the window open, and then I thought it was my mom's radio, so I turned to her to tell her to turn it off. And there my mother sat, white as a ghost, trembling and staring at me. I quickly finished what I was saying and letting the salt out of my fingers before I moved to the front of her desk. She looked at me and asked me if I'd heard it, and I was just bowled over. This voice had been so evil that I'd gotten cold chills down my spine. My mother was freaking out at this point, and I was feeling extremely paranoid, so I asked Mom to follow me around the office as I finished my cleansing. We moved back to her office, Mom looking half in tears, and all she could really say was that it had sounded like a demon. It hit me then, her nightmare from the month before. So I asked Mom if I could do a cleansing on her, which she was against at first, because she had had very bad experiences with the churches and blessings from growing up in a strict Pentecostal home. But she assented to it once I assured her I wouldn't be laying hands on her or speaking in tongues. So I moved over to her and wrapped my arms around her shoulders, my chin on her head as she was sitting down. I began to ask the goddess to cleanse this demon that had lashed onto my mother. As I have never done anything like this before, I was a bit nervous. My mother started bawling, and I mean truly hysterical sobs. And at that point I started to honestly flip my lid. My mother is one of the strongest people I know, and to see her truly frightened and crying not only scared the crap out of me, it made me want to deck something, and hard. She looked at me and said, and I will remember her words until the day I die because it upset me so badly, "I feel it burrowing into my ears. It hurts. It's talking to me. Get it out, Callista. Get it out." I hugged her and put my mouth to her ear, just about in tears myself. I didn't know what to do at that point, really, so I just said what welled up in me. Meanwhile, the ghost Bradley that I had talked about before was hunkered out in the back office, trying to pretend he wasn't there, or whatever ghosts do when they are upset. I told the demon to get away from my mother, which I now know was an incubus. I told the demon to get away from my mother, which I now know was an incubus. I told it that my mother would love me more than it would ever need her, and to get the hell out of her. I heard this strange whooshing noise, and then it was like coming up for air after being underwater and holding your breath until you were dizzy. For a month, my mother and I had been at each other's throats, to the point where we would just look at each other and I would have the urge to slam her head into a wall or just start screaming at her. I thought this was stress from working with my mother and the normal drama that happens in a relationship between a mother and a teenage daughter. I think it was this demon just feeding off our emotions, the most intense being our emotions of anger towards one another. When we went home, I did the most thorough cleansing on my home I have ever done in my life. And during the day at the office, I sat there a half an hour watching a black shape flash through our windows, looking like it was trying to get back in. I'm glad to say, it couldn't. The Hooded Demon. When I was about 8 or 9, I shared a room with my dad, and one night I was getting home late with my mom. I looked down the hallway to see a short, robed, hooded thing standing there staring at me. I couldn't see his eyes under his hood. Where his face should be was all dark. When I told my mom, she looked, and it wasn't there anymore. About a week later, as I was sleeping, I felt something pulling on my leg. This time it wasn't wearing a hood. As I looked at it, it looked like a gremlin, or the orc from Lord of the Rings. This happened on and off for the next couple of months. When I woke up and saw it, it was because I felt something watching me. I was unable to move or scream for my parents. Finally, one night as it was pulling on my leg, I got the nerve to take a swing at it. It then disappeared, every night after which I prayed, and I never saw it again. About 4 months ago, a friend of mine was telling a group at work about how he had seen a demon-like creature at his bed when he was little, and I ended up finishing the story for him. I wonder if the other people who have experienced this live anywhere in the San Pedro, California area. More black-eyed people. It was a nice sunny day in November, and I had been out running some errands. I decided to stop at Starbucks on my way home to get some tea. There were a lot of people at Starbucks, which was no surprise. I got my tea, headed out the door, and had to stop and organize myself as my keys migrated to the bottom of the purse, and I still had to get my wallet in. So I plopped the stuff down on an open table and tried to get my act together. I felt like I was being watched, so I turned around to give a look of whatever to the perv that I assumed was watching me. The smart aleck remark died in my mouth as I caught sight of him and made inadvertent eye contact. I should note here, I did not see anything unusual in his manner of dress. Jeans, black shirt, lightweight black jacket, no hat or overcoat, not unusual of dress. His hair was almost black, but didn't look like any darker than my boyfriend's hair, of whom is of Japanese descent. His skin tone was a bit olive and pale, but not overly so. It was the eyes and the aura coming off of him that scared me. The eyes, blacker than black, no white at all, wall-to-wall black, and I just felt a darkness around him, an evil. As I looked in his eyes, I somehow knew that was not a human soul occupying that body, and I felt that he knew that I knew he was not human. I got the feeling that he was amused by this, that he could keep humanity away, and he was challenging me. Telepathically, I felt him say, "Are you going to run away too?" To which I replied, "I'm leaving because I was planning on leaving." I then broke eye contact, deliberately, and proceeded to get my stuff organized and walked back to my car. Somehow, I felt that it was important that I show no fear as he was still watching me, so I held it to a fast walk, got in my car, and left. This spooked me pretty badly, but I now know that we are not alone in this world. We share our world with others, non-human. Voice from Hell. It was about 7 p.m. I was alone. My parents were out and I was reading a book for homework. Suddenly, I felt a cold chill come over me and immediately sensed a being in the house. I feared if I turned around, something would try to kill me. I darted out of the room and into the living room. I was beginning to calm down and tell myself that I was just being paranoid and that there was no one in the house when I heard a voice whisper very close to my ear. It sounded to me like, I'll be waiting for you. The voice was very eerie. It sounded like the voice was of a man. It sounded dead. Needless to say, I was freaked out and ran to my next-door neighbor's house and told them what had happened. They said that they would come over and take a look. There didn't seem to be anyone at the house. My neighbor finally gave up and told me that I'd just been hearing things, and she went back home. I was still scared when my parents got home, and I told them what had happened, and of course they didn't believe me. That night, I woke up around 3 a.m. I didn't know why I had woken up, but I recall being very frightened. I immediately felt the same cold chill, and I sensed someone else in the room with me. Then I heard it again. The words were more stretched out, however, and it sounded like, "I'll be waiting for you." I screamed, and my parents ran in. I told them what I had heard. They comforted me and told me that I probably just dreamed the voice, and that I was safe. They said nothing would hurt me, and I had finally calmed down, but I was still scared, and I went back to sleep. The next morning I awoke, sat up, and noticed that something wasn't right. I looked up on my dresser and saw that my cross necklace wasn't where it should be. I got up and frantically searched around my room. I was about to give up hope when I stepped on something sharp. I looked down and saw my beloved necklace, smashed. It was in little pieces littered across the room. It also looked like it had been coated with blood. Some of the pieces were rusted and red. I have never heard this voice since. To this day, I believe I had an encounter with an evil being. A being straight from hell. Fallen angel. I like to hike out in the woods around my town a lot, and do so quite frequently. Usually, I have a friend with me, so we can talk, and it doesn't get to be just a habit that I do. But sometimes, I get an eerie feeling when I'm in the woods. Usually, everything gets quiet, and things seem distant. Only once have I had this feeling with my friend walking with me, and what an event it was. We were talking about life, deep subjects, when I got the feeling. All the forest sounds had ceased to resonate. No birds harping, or even a breeze to rustle the leaves. Even my friend had stopped talking and stopped in his tracks. Suddenly, my friend fell to his knees and bowed his head. He wouldn't move, and I couldn't pick him up. It was like he was bolted to the ground with large weights. I couldn't help but wonder what was going on. The blue sky turned gray, and sunlight that streamed through the trees not but seconds earlier no longer shone through. Now I have seen apparitions before, some good, some bad, but this was the worst yet. I looked in the direction we were traveling, and there was a large, dark figure. He stood taller than me by a foot, and I'm nearly 6 feet tall. The thing looked up at me and just stood there staring for a moment. I felt a heavy presence of disgust and hate. It seemed to grow stronger as I looked at him. I broke eye contact with him, not wanting to feel those emotions too much longer. But he spoke to me in a clear voice. He commanded me to look at him. I knew that he was evil, and I shouldn't look, but I wasn't afraid of what he was, so I did anyway. My friend was still bolted to the ground, so I looked up, and this time he was but a foot away from me. He wore all black and had enormous wings, but they weren't like a bird's. They were strange wings. One wing was only thin bones, like those that make up a bat's wings, and the other was a wing of rotting flesh and molting feathers. The only way I can title him in appearance was like a fallen angel. We stood there for a bit just watching each other. Then the thing raised an arm and pointed with one finger at me. He smiled and said,
"I will see you again one day. Don't forget your debt with the devil."
He then told me to bow, and I refused. This angered the dark angel, and he forced me to kneel toward him. I felt as if my spirit was being stabbed and twisted in torture. He simply laughed then and walked off to the side, and I didn't see him after that. Right when he disappeared, my friend got up from his locked position on the ground. I asked him what he had been doing through the whole thing. All my friend could say was, "What are you talking about? We were just talking and you froze instantly." He stuck to his story, but he couldn't explain why all the trees around us were dead and the ground dusty and cracked. I still go back there sometimes, and the place hasn't changed at all. The trees haven't decayed or regrown any, even though they have been dead for quite some time now. I still haven't met him again, or what he meant when he said don't forget my debt to the devil. But I know, regrettably, that someday he will be back. Echo and the Demon. My son Caleb was about 2.5 years old, and all through his short life has done strange things and had strange encounters, such as experiencing cold spots, seeing empty rocking chairs rocking, talking to walls, and visualizing lights in his photos, etc. But this was different. And this was dangerous. He would wake up at night screaming for me to come in to get him. He would not walk to my room unless he was told, "Yes, you can come to my bed." It was strangely specific and a little scary. The flesh around his eyes was purple, and when he hugged me, he was always shivering, and I could literally feel him draining my energy. He complained about the man with big eyes sitting by his bed at night and rocking, telling him he was a bad boy for wanting to go to my room. He said, "When I go to your room, he's running down the hallway after me, screaming I'm naughty." You can imagine what this was like. My son was terrified in his room, and I could not do a damn thing about it. I wasn't a believer, but I had to believe him. So when he started talking about incense and candles at 3, trust me, I bloody listened. By this point, we had noticed he would be horribly upset, then suddenly calm and go to sleep exhausted, but relaxed and okay. It was always at this point he would talk about Echo. Echo was a big man with wings. Echo stopped things from bothering him. We had had light bulbs shattered above us, things screaming my name. My pentagram that my son picked for me burned against my chest. And then sometimes the most peaceful smell of jasmine. And I would see lights as well. Nobody around us could deny what was happening. Caleb was terrified of his bedroom and would wet himself and pass out if his door shut. His toys were being moved around constantly. Caleb said this was by a friend, though, who missed him while he was at his father's. So a good friend of mine took us to a spiritual shop. There I met a lady who took my son's hand and talked to him about this thing by his bed. They then discussed Echo and the lady with the wings who came to help him. She cried as she walked my son through her shop and asked him to point Echo out. He pointed out a picture of Archangel Michael. With tears streaming, she explained that Echolosian is the language of the angels, and that Echo was Michael in his language. My son is an indigo child. She gave us the rights to clear this thing out, and during this burning of incense and incantation, my son dragged me around the house, pointing and saying, "There, Mommy, chase him. Get him to the door." I couldn't see anything, but just as we go to the door, something as cold as ice grabbed my legs and climbed up. It hurt inside to have this incredible cold on me. Caleb opened the door, and in this strong, beautiful voice, he yelled, "Michael, help my mommy. Michael, help. You are not welcome here. Get out. Go to the light. Don't be scared. I promise you'll be okay. Michael, lady, help me." The cold lurched off me, and the door slammed. I had wet myself, and I was standing there in shock at my beautiful blue-eyed boy, and I swear I saw the man he will become. He dropped my hand, walked into the lounge, put on a Bug's Life, opened his chippies and sat on the couch. I followed him and just watched. I asked him if he was going to be okay. Was it gone? He looked at me, 3 years old, and said, "I just want to be a boy for a while, Mommy. No more talking about it, okay?" All I could do was love him more for that. It's now been 4 years. He's coming up on his 7th birthday. 6 months ago, my son came downstairs and asked to see his angel oracle cards. He hadn't touched them for that whole time. He opened the box, turned the deck upside down, and shuffled on the floor. He closed his eyes and held his hands over the jumbled deck and pulled a card. It was Archangel Michael. He smiled and said, "Look, Mom, it's time." He has been collecting gems, reading cards, talking to Michael, catching ghost photos, predicting, reading minds, but most importantly, he has loved unconditionally. I love my son regardless of who or what he is, but to have a genuine earth angel in my arms every night is the most beautiful feeling in the universe.